welcome back to another episode of Combat Step. Before we delve into the depths of the multiverse, continue supporting our channel in its quest to bring you more thrilling content. By becoming a patron supporter, you'll gain access to exclusive perks and help us continue to create top-notch videos. Be sure to use our Dragon Shield and Ink Gaming affiliate links in the description when you purchase your next set of products. Don't forget to follow us on social media and stay updated on the latest news, deck techs, and community discussions. And of course, make sure to subscribe to our channel to join the ever-growing community of fellow Planeswalkers. With your support, we'll continue to explore the boundless possibilities of Magic the Gathering together. Today we're going to take a look at a build of Yuriko the Tiger Shadow and the cards that this deck usually runs and why. First, Yuriko is a popular commander with Commander Ninjutsu. It costs the mere colors to ninjutsu it in, and you never have to pay the commander tax when you're using this ability. Whenever a ninja you control deals combat damage to a player, you reveal the top card of your library. You may put that card to your hand, and then each opponent loses life equal to the card's mana value. So the goal here is to attack and have some ninjas on the field and be able to rip some big bombs off the top of your deck, killing your opponents quickly with some really nasty creatures. Let's dive in and see how this deck is typically built. We're going to start by looking off the 0 drops and the 1 drops, which are really the enablers of the deck to get them out early so that you have a turn 1 or turn 2 Yuriko. We run Ornithopter, Memnite, and Phyrexian Walker as our 0 drops. Obviously, we can ninjutsu over them and then replay them within the same turn, which is great value for us. We want to get those in our hand. We do run Changeling Outcast because it is a changeling, thus it is a ninja. And then Fairy Seer is here because when it ATBs, we scry 2, which is nice. We can do a little bit of top deck manipulation, and then it is a flyer. Fourth Bridge Prowler is nice because when we play it, a creature gets -1/-1, so we can kill off a mana dork, or even just reduce the power and toughness of another creature that our opponents might block with. So now, if they were to block, it might die, which would de-incentivize them for blocking. Signal Pest has Battle Cry, which is great. And then it cannot be blocked except by creatures with flying or reach, so a little bit of evasion built in. Spectral Sailor has Flash, and then flying, it also has an ability that we can pay for mana to draw a card, so depending on where we are in the game, we can do a little bit of card draw with it. Ingenious Prodigy is nice because it has Skulk, which means it can't be blocked with creatures with greater power. Mockingbird came from the new Bloomburrow set and is a great addition to the deck as it has flying and it can copy something. Thousand Face Shadow is a ninja, but it is also something that we can play as a 1-drop, which is great. Universal Automaton is a changeling, i.e. it is a ninja. Wingcrafter is a 1-drop that pairs with something when it comes in as Soulbond, so that creature would then have flying as long as it's paired with the Wingcrafter, so we could even pair it with something like our commander. And then Fairy Dream Thief has flying, and when it enters the battlefield, we surveil 1, so we can look at the card and decide whether it's going to stay there or whether or not it's going to go in our graveyard. So if it's something that we don't really want, like a land, we get rid of it. We could do this right before we get ready to attack, so we have an idea of what we're going to flip into. And then it has an ability for 3 mana that we exile it from our graveyard, draw a card, and lose 1 life. So it gives us a little bit of options for us depending on where we are in the game. As for 2 drops, we have Moon Circuit Hacker, which also has ninjutsu for a blue, and when Moon Circuit Hacker deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card unless Moon Circuit Hacker enter the battlefield this turn, so if you ninjutsu'd it in, you could draw without having to discard. Orcish Bowmasters, which has Flash, and then has the ability that when it enters the battlefield or whenever an opponent draws a card except for the first one they drew each turn, it deals 1 damage to any target and amasses 1. And there is a combo in the deck with Orcish Bowmasters, which we'll talk about later. And then we have Satoral the Infiltrator, which has Menace, and then whenever it or 1 or more other non-token creatures enter the battlefield under your control, if none of them were cast or no mana was spent to cast them, we draw a card. So this is good because as you ninjutsu in creatures, you'll be drawing and digging through your deck a little bit. Silver Fur Master has ninjutsu for a black and a blue, and then it reduces the cost of other ninjutsu abilities, which is good because some of our other ninjas are a little bit pricey to ninjutsu in, and then it also buffs them up, and other rogues get +1/+1. Skull Snatcher has ninjutsu for a black, and then when it deals combat damage to a player, you move up to 2 target cards in that player's graveyard. So this is a way to kind of hate on some of those graveyard decks just a little bit, or even just get rid of some pieces that need to be removed from a graveyard. Tetsuko gives other creatures you control with power or toughness 1 or less. They make them can't be blocked, which makes a lot of your creatures in the first set of creatures we have unblockable. Thassa's Oracle is here, obviously, because it is one of our combo pieces. We do run Nezumi Prowler, which has ninjutsu for 2. Not every Yuriko deck runs this, but some do, because when it enters the battlefield, target creature you control gains Death Touch and Lifelink. So it's a little bit of a way to gain a little bit of life, but also if the blocks were declared, you could then have this creature come in and now it will kill the creatures that were blocked. We also run Dokuchi Silencer, which has ninjutsu for 2. Again, not all Yuriko decks run this, but the ones that do, when it deals combat damage to player, you may discard a card. When you do, you destroy target creature or planeswalker that players control. So it is a way of removing some things off the battlefield, some of those pesky planeswalkers. And then some Yuriko decks are running Dauthi Voidwalker for some removal, and then the ability to also activate Dauthi's ability and play some of the things that are underneath the Dauthi pile. This does hurt some of those other decks that are really relying on their graveyard and being able to recur things out of their graveyard, because now those cards never make it to their graveyard, and that's a problem for those kind of decks. So it is a good little Staxy type of creature, but not all Yuriko decks are on the Dauthi train either. For 3 drops in the deck, we are running some of the MDFCs, which means that they are creatures or lands. On the backside, they are lands, and we can pay 3 to have them come in untapped, which is great because they're versatile. So they're either a land or they're some other thing for us, which reduces our land count and ups our density of creatures and other spells. And we just got several new MDFCs with Modern Horizons 3. First is Bogart Trawler. Enters the battlefield, exile target player's graveyard. Again, not necessarily for that, but it's a good thing to hit off the top of Yuriko, and it's a land. Hydraulic Specimen has flash, and when it enters the battlefield, you may change the target of target instant or sorcery with a single target to Hydraulic Specimen, so it's like a redirect, which is good because if someone was trying to remove one of our key ninjas or possibly our commander or one of our stacks pieces, we can flash this in and redirect it, or we can play it as a land. Mist Syndicate Naga has ninjutsu for 3 and also costs 3 to cast regularly, but when it deals combat damage to a player, you create a token that's a copy of it. So over the course of the game, this will create more and more Mist Syndicate Nagas for you, which is good because they're ninjas, and that's helpful to have as many ninjas so you can get multiple triggers off Yuriko. Mistblade Shinobi has ninjutsu for 1, and when it deals combat damage to a player, you may return target creature that player controls to its owner's hand. So you can bounce something that maybe wasn't even declared as a blocker, or you can just bounce a creature that they have that's pesky for you. Opposition Agent is here so that we can get some searching happening from our own by flashing this in and stealing their searches, and then it prevents others from actually searching, so it does give you a little bit of a stacks effect. Prosperous Thieves have ninjutsu for 2. When one or more ninjas or rogue creatures you control deal combat damage to player, you create a treasure token. So this is good, helps you create more mana, which is nice because some of our spells can be expensive, and having more mana makes those actually castable for us, and it just generates value by making those treasures. We are running Covert Technician in some decks, which has ninjutsu for 2, and when it deals combat damage to a player, we may put a artifact card from our hand with lesser equal to the damage that was dealt onto the battlefield, which is a good way to cheat in some of our artifacts, cheat in maybe a stacks piece. Walker of Secret Ways has ninjutsu for 2, and when it deals combat damage to a player, look at that player's hand, and then it has an ability for 2, return target ninja you control to its owner's hand, and you activate this only during our turn. This has fallen out of flavor in a lot of Yuriko decks, and that's okay. It is a ninja, so it does give us that Yuriko trigger, but it's really not as good as it once was. We're also running Nashi Moon's Sage Saga in some instances. It is a ninja, has ninjutsu for 4, which is not good. But when it deals damage to a player, you exile top card of player's library, and then until end of turn, you may play one of those cards, and if you cast a spell this way, you pay life equal to its mana value rather than its mana cost. So you can pay a little bit of life, steal some spells, It's not super great because the ninjutsu cost is 4, and really we want to be under 3 as much as possible for our ninjutsu cost, just to make it cost effective. There are some combos that Nashi has where you can do some really nasty, crazy things. And then some Yuriko decks are running Rug of Smothering. It's like a Staxi effect, and when Rug of Smothering is on the battlefield, it can hurt you too, so you do have to be careful. When a player casts a spell, they lose 1 life for each spell they've cast this turn, and it has flying. So for us, maybe it's not super bad because we're not casting tons of spells, but it is bad against those decks that are just going to try and cast and cast and cast and cast and cast. Rug of Smothering is going to really punish them, so it's a good Staxi piece. It's not the greatest, though, for us, but it is run in some Yuriko decks because it, over the course of the game, can do a good little bit of damage to those storm type of decks that are just going to try to play 2 and 3 and 4 spells a turn. So it does add up, and then it is a flyer as well. For 4 drops in the deck, we start off with a Ingenious Infiltrator, which is a ninja. It has ninjutsu for 2, which is black and blue. And then whenever a ninja you control deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card. Ninja of the Deep Hours also has ninjutsu for 2. When it deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. So we're getting access to card draw, which is good for us. We want to be able to do things. We want to be able to ninjutsu. We are running Roaming Throne for 4 mana. It has Ward 2. You choose a creature type, which would be Ninja. So Roaming Throne also is a Ninja, which is good because you could attack with it. And then if a triggered ability of another creature you control with the chosen type triggers, it triggers an additional time. So then you might be drawing additional cards. Yuriko itself would trigger an additional time. So this is going to really be an impactful card to have on the battlefield. And it's hard to get rid of too with the Ward 2. Sakashima's Student has ninjutsu 2. It can come in as a copy of any other creature on the battlefield except it's a ninja and it's other types. So it could copy one of your own creatures. It could copy a Dockside. It can copy anything on the battlefield, which is good. And then it is a ninja, so you could still start attacking with it and get the triggers from Yuriko off of it, as well as the benefit of stealing something from somebody else's field. We do run Shoulder the Apocalypse. It has Death Touch, which makes it hard for people to really deal with it. It gives us a little bit of protection when people are going to start swinging into us as we continue to become a threat. Whenever we draw a card, we gain 2 life, which is nice because we are going to be the threat, so our life total is going to be pressured quite a bit so that we are taken out of the game, because the best type of removal is player removal. And then whenever an opponent draws a card, they lose 2 life, so it's going to drain them. And it's really going to stop people from going too crazy here and drawing tons of cards because of the Shieldred. And it's going to force the removal onto Shieldred instead of forcing the removal at us particularly. We're running Sprazazan Legate, which has flying. And then if an opponent controls a mountain and you control an island, you may play it without paying its mana cost. So essentially it's free for us as long as those conditions are met. And that's highly likely to be met. And then it's also a 4-drop. So we flip over the pot with it, and it's a bomb of 4, which is not bad. Subtlety is run in some Yuriko decks because it has flash and flying, and when it enters the battlefield, up to 1 target creature or planeswalker is returned to its owner's top or bottom of their library, so it gets something off the field. If they choose to put it on top, then that's what they're drawing, so it controls the draw a little bit, especially if they tutored for something and you do this. Now they're going to have to decide whether what they tutored for is more important or is it going to go on the bottom, in which case it's probably good either way because they don't get the card they tutored for if they put it on top, or if it's a really pesky creature, it's now on the bottom of their library. And you can also evoke it by exiling a blue card from your hand. We do run Italian the Kindly Lord. It has flying, and we choose a number between 1 and 10. And whenever an opponent casts a spell with mana value, power, or toughness equal to that number, that player loses 2 life, and we draw a card. One of the cool things about running Italian inside of Yuriko is that you have the ability to reset it. You can attack with it, and then ninjutsu over the top, and the next time you play it, you choose a different number. So maybe early game, you're choosing 1. And then maybe later game you're choosing 2 because of some of the win conditions and docksides and whatnot that revolve around 2, or I mean you could even change it to something more than 2 as the game goes on. But the nice thing is you have the versatility with Yuriko to actually change the number that it is on. And then some decks are running Sakashima of 1,000 Faces, Sakashima the Imposter, and Spark Double as some clone packages to be able to clone other things that are on the board. You can clone people's dockside, you can clone some of their big creatures, you could even clone some of your own things. Cloning Yuriko with the Sakashima of 1,000 Faces, it removes the legend rule, which is good because now you have 2 Yurikos and you're essentially doubling the Yuriko triggers. So it's not bad to have some of these clones. They're not common in a lot of Yuriko decks, but they are in some of the Yuriko decks like the aggro list as pieces of copying things and just really going quickly with Yuriko once this stuff starts to happen. It's usually doomed for the table very quickly once the Sakashimas come online. Now, there are a couple other 4-drop ninjas, but they're not really played very much in Yuriko because they're not as good in the slot as you want. There's Azura Smoke Shaper, which has ninjutsu for 2, so it is relatively cheap to ninjutsu. But when it enters the battlefield, target creature you control gains indestructible till end of turn, which is okay, I suppose. But they're just better things to do in that 4-drop slot, so Azura doesn't see much play. We also have a Moon Snare Specialist, which has ninjutsu for 3, which is kind of tough. That is the top of where we want to be holding up that mana to ninjutsu. When it enters the battlefield, return up to 1 target creature to its owner's hand. So it does bounce something, which can be good. To return something, you could bounce something that your opponent's on any opponent has. It doesn't have to be the one that is being attacked, which is okay. But again, we're at the top of our ninjutsu cost, which is 3, which is really where we want to be. And then the spell itself is a 4-drop. And Moonblade Shinobi, again, has a ninjutsu cost of 3. When it deals combat damage to a player, you create a 1/1 blue illusion creature with flying. So it does have flying, you could attack with it. It does generate creatures, which then you can ninjutsu other things on top of. And so it does have some value. There's just other things that are in this slot for 4 mana that gain better and quicker results. These were very popular ninjas in Yuriko, but over the course of recent updates, they've kind of fallen out of favor just because of the room that we have to do other things at the 4-drop. But they are good ninjas, and they did see a lot of play once upon a time. For 5 drops, Yuriko typically doesn't run a lot here. A lot of these creatures are here for value, such as Street Wraith. It has Swamp Walk, which not really here for that part. That part's not really relevant to us, but we can pay 2 life to cycle to draw a card. So it's really here for the card draw, and then if we happen to flip into it, it's a nice little bomb to flip into. Harvester of Misery has Menace. When it enters the battlefield, other creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn. We do have to be careful because this does affect us as well, but it could be a way to remove some things on our opponent's side as well. So it's a good piece of getting things cleared on our opponent's side, or at least reducing some of the power and toughness of their creatures. And then it has an ability for a black and a generic that we can discard it, and target creature gets -2/-2 till end of turn. So really we want to play it for the discarding effect to have a creature get -2/-2 and then maybe swing in for an attack, or if it's been blocked, we can do this so that it will die. But the other effect is good too as a board wipey piece. There are some ninjas that are 5 mana, but they don't really see play anymore because there are just other things in the slot that we want to be doing and other things in the deck that we just don't have room for them like we once did. Throat Slitter, for example, has ninjutsu for 3. Again, top of where I want to be for ninjutsu. When it deals combat damage to a player, we destroy target non-black creature that player controls. So that effect is good, being able to remove creatures, but unfortunately this just is out of our deck because we have other things that are better in our deck, and this just doesn't have room anymore for it. Okiba Gang Shinobi has ninjutsu for 4, which is again not really where we want to be for ninjutsuing things in. When it deals combat damage to a player, that player discards 2 cards, so the discarding can be good. You know, it could make our opponents have less and less cards over the course of the game, so it's not a bad effect to have. Ninja of the New Moon has ninjutsu for 4, and that's all. It is a 6/3 though, so hitting people for 6 is pretty good to taking their life totals down quickly, but other than that, it just doesn't do anything. And then it has a relatively small toughness, which makes it easy to remove. So the investment is really not a great return over the course of the game. Fallen Shinobi has ninjutsu for 4. And when it deals combat damage to a player, that player exiles the top 2 cards of their library. And until end of turn, we may play those cards without paying their mana cost. This used to be super great. We could hit all kinds of great things. And it is still a fairly good card. It's just, unfortunately, it's been pushed out of the deck with other things. But being able to steal things from your opponents is good. So if you are on a budget and can't afford some of the other cards that Yuriko runs, this is a card I would 100% put back in to Yuriko, just because of the being able to cast things that your opponents have without paying their mana cost. Higuru the Stillwind has ninjutsu for 4, and when it deals combat damage to a player, you may search your library for a ninja card, reveal it, put it in your hand, and it redo shuffle. And then it has another ability for 2, that target ninja is unblockable. The unblockable used to be really good, but the mana investment is kind of tight at times. And then being able to search for ninja card, if we were on a lot more ninjas, this was better at one time than it now is. But it is still an okay card. This was one of the first cards that has been removed as Yuriko got its first major upgrades after the deck came out. That Yuriko plays are 6 mana and above. Orochi Soul Reaver has ninjutsu for 4. Whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to player, you create a treasure token, and then you manifest the top card of that player's library. So that's decent, gives you some mana. This came out with the Outlaws of Thunder Junction, and is starting to see a little bit of play in Yuriko now. Ink Eyes, Servant of Oni, used to see play in Yuriko back when we were on the original OG build and just didn't have many ninjas to choose from, but it has fallen out of favor because of the 5 mana ninjutsu cost. There's just better things to play. But when it deals combat damage to a player, you may put a target creature from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. So you could steal some stuff, steal their dockside, steal their other big creatures, which is not bad. And you do have the ability to pay 2 to regenerate it, which would remove it and then bring it back in so that it's safe. Silent Blade Oni has an ninjutsu for 6, which is just, unfortunately, just too expensive to hold up 6 mana to do this. And then whenever it deals combat damage to a player, look at that player's hand. You may cast a non-land card from their hand without paying its mana cost, which used to be really good. You used to be able to steal some pretty gross things. If you're on a budget, you might consider adding this back in if you can't afford some of the other cards, but it's just unfortunately been priced out of the deck with other things. Shadow of Mortality is fantastic. It is a big bomb hitting our opponents for 15, and then it's actually playable as over the course of the game you are going to get hit with different things. Your life total is going to be taken down. You might actually be able to pay the 2 mana and then play this, and now you have a 7/7. You could then ninjutsu something on top of it, or just even punch your opponent for 7. So it's actually, besides being a big bomb, is useful and playable as a creature in Yuriko. It's a great blocker. That's typically light on sorceries. We do run Imp Seal and Demonic Tutor for obvious reasons, so we can tutor up big bombs or whatever we might need at that time. Aghanim Awakening is an MDFC, so it could be a land, or we can pay X and then we return each creature from our graveyard with mana value X or less, which is great because if we got board wipe, we can return a bunch of our ninjas or a bunch of our creatures right back. Step Through. Some Yuriko decks run it because you could choose to return 2 target creatures to their owner's hand. Maybe you do that. Or otherwise known as the Thassa's Oracle Tutor for 2 mana. Seagate Recreation, another MDFC. Here could be a land, or depending on when you're at in the game, you could draw a bunch of cards and then have no maximum hand size. Temporal Mastery, Temporal Trespass are bombs in the deck, and also extra turns. Temporal Mastery is castable potentially if it's your first draw and that's what you draw. If you do that off the Yuriko, it doesn't work with the miracle cost. Temporal Trespass has Delve, so you could potentially delve away a bunch of it and only pay 3 mana to take an extra turn. Toxic Deluge gives you a good board wipe because sometimes you just need the creatures to die, and maybe you have been board wiped and maybe you have a couple creatures you could spare, but in order for your game plan to get going, you have to remove some creatures, and so Toxic Deluge gives you that option to remove however many by paying X to give creatures that are on the battlefield -X. So depending on your life total and what your resources are, you could board wipe pretty much whatever you need. And Nanogen Convergence gives you choose a target creature you control, and each creature becomes a copy of that until end of turn, except it isn't legendary. So you could end up making a bunch of Yurikos, and in the next combat, win the game potentially. Now, unfortunately, if this was instant speed, this would be in every Yuriko deck, but because it's not, it is not in every Yuriko deck. It is in more of the aggro type list because Yuriko is trying to go quick and just end the game and just super aggressive. And so unfortunately people can see it coming, so they might be able to do things about it, but having a bunch of Yurikos and them all triggering off each other could single-handedly end the game, and that would be a fantastic way of closing it out quickly. Yuriko is pretty heavy on instants because we want to be able to do things and react and respond to triggers. We aren't going to talk about all the instants that we run, so we do run obviously tutors and counter spells. We run counters like An Offer You Can't Refuse, Flusterstorm, Mental Misstep. We run Force of Negation, Fierce Guardianship, and Force of Will. And of course we're running Mystical Tutor and Vamp Tutor. We are going to talk about a couple counter spells we don't run. We don't run Pact of Negation. And not necessarily because it's a 0 drop and we don't want to flip into it, but our lands are so dense nowadays that being able to pay that 5 mana and that color specific mana can be a challenge. And so that is why Pact of Negation has kind of found its way out of Yuriko. Mana Drain is another counter spell that has found its way out of Yuriko. It's typically a cEDH staple, but our lands are so dense and the 2 pips for the blue mana on Mana Drain is sometimes tough to come by and just hold up those 2 blue mana in Yuriko, and so Mana Drain has found its way out. Swan Song, another cEDH staple, is not in Yuriko because we don't want to give our opponents either a attacker or a blocker, and Swan Song does that. They can use that bird to block our stuff, they can use the bird to hit us, and we just don't want to do that. So those 3 counters you do not typically see in Yuriko. Other instances that we do run, though, we do run Dark Ritual because it's a great way of being able to get things in and just ramp out things. You could hold up a black mana and then Dark Writ into an opposition agent, which would be stealing somebody's search in response to something. Demonic Consultation goes well with our Thassa's Oracle combo. Brainstorm is great for us. It allows us to put some cards back, draw some cards, so if we've drawn into a big bomb that we don't want, or from a previous Yuriko flip we have one in our hand, we want to put it back in response to the Yuriko trigger, this allows that to happen. Limb Duel's Vault allows us to go digging and pay life every time we do that to try to look at the top 5 cards. Now you don't get to pick and choose from those and make different piles, but if you find a good 5 that has decent amount of bombs in them, you can stick with that. Marcher Swirling Mist allows you to phase stuff out, so it's a little bit of ways of removing things. Maybe you phase stuff out and then go to attack and now you've cleared the board, or you can, in response to somebody trying to do some crazy things, you phase out maybe their commander, getting rid of their Kenrith, getting rid of their Kinnan and the Jila, whatnot. Dismember, another great way of removing things, not as popular in Yuriko as it once was, but you could pay to be able to remove a creature. Force of Despair is excellent in Yuriko. If it's not your turn, you may exile a black card from your hand, which you probably have, and then you destroy all creatures that enter the battlefield this turn. So if you're up against, let's say, Najila, this is a great way of just annihilating their field of things. And sorry, Najila. We are on the 2 new flares, Flare of Denial and Flare of Malice, because we have stuff we can get rid of to it. If we really are in a pinch, Yuriko can be the thing we get rid of, and then we just ninjutsu it back later. It's not that big of a deal. We also run Sink into Stupor in one of the MDFCs. It's a bounce spell. We may or may not cast it, otherwise it is a land that we could play. And Deadly Rollick, we love our free spells in Yuriko, being able to exile a target creature as long as we control our commander, which we often do. Not a bad thing for Yuriko to have access to. And of course, it is 4 damage to our opponents if that is flipped off the trigger. Other instance that we run is a Tainted Pack, which goes well with our Thassa's Oracle combo. Fell the Profane is another MDFC, so it could be a land, otherwise we could destroy a target creature or planeswalker. Snuff Out is another great piece of removal. We can pay 4 life if we control a swamp instead of the mana cost, which is pretty good for us, and then destroy a target black creature, it can't be regenerated. Contagion is another way of removing things. We can pay a life and remove a black card from our game, aka exiling it, and then we can not pay the mana cost of Contagion, and then we can distribute 2, -2, -1 counters on any number of creatures. So we could give it to one singular creature if we're trying to kill it, or just make sure they don't really have a great blocker. Or you can distribute it among 2 creatures, maybe kill off 2 mana dorks or 2 little guys so that you have some room to do some stuff. Misdirection is a great way of removing something and changing the target. As you'll notice, a lot of our stuff requires other conditions, and we can usually do that making a lot of these spells free, and then of course they're big bombs when we rip with them off the top with Yuriko's trigger. Submerge, as long as an opponent controls a forest and we have an island, then we don't have to pay the mana cost, and we put a target creature on top of its library. This is great, especially if someone just tutored, because now they're not going to get what they tutored for. It removes a creature, so it could be pretty pesky, and then maybe open up the door for an attack with us and give us somebody to attack. Commandeer, we can remove 2 blue cards from our hand rather than paying the mana cost, and then we gain control of a target non-creature spell, and we choose new targets, so we can steal something and change the way it's coming. Consign Oblivion, it's a huge bomb for us, and the consign side actually is playable for the 2 mana to return a target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. The sorcery Oblivion side, target opponent discards 2 card, is not really what we're here for, but when this is flipped off of the Yuriko trigger, it adds both sides of the spell when it counts the damage. This card is going to hit your opponents for 7 because it counts both sides. Dig Through Time is in some Yuriko decks. Because it's a huge bomb, you might be able to delve and only pay the 2 blue and look at the top 7 cards, put 2 of them in your hand, the rest in the bottom. It is being cut from some Yuriko decks, however, just because we need other things that have more uses, and this is a card that is not always the most useful depending on where we are in the game. Yuriko decks used to be very light on artifacts, especially mana rocks, but here lately we've seen an increase in mana rocks as we're trying to go quicker and quicker, and we want to accelerate the deck. We do sometimes run Chrome Mox. We have usually plenty of cards we can pitch to this, especially if we pitch Consign Oblivion, then this taps for blue or black, which is great. Lotus Petal, Mana Crypt, Mox Amber, all mana rocks that help to accelerate us. It's great to do a turn 1 and do any of these, especially the Mana Crypt, turn 1 Mana Crypt with a land into Heuristic Study, great. Mox Amber, we do obviously need a legendary creature to turn on, but with our commander coming out typically turn 2, that's not really an issue. Some Yuriko decks run Sensei's Divining Top as a way of being able to manipulate the top deck and then maybe draw the card, put Sensei's on top, or just be able to rearrange the cards that are there, especially if they're about to have a Yuriko activation go off. Soul Ring, another great accelerant. Null Rod, some Yuriko decks do run, because with as many Docksides that are running around and clones being played in decks specifically for Dockside, let's be real here, clones are not played in cEDH typically for anything else but to clone the Dockside. And so with treasures being a huge thing, Null Rod is a great stacks piece to prevent that. Grafdigger's Cage is in some Yuriko decks. It stops stuff coming out of the graveyards, which is a good way of slowing down or turning off some decks. Cursed Totem, activated abilities of creatures, so no more mana dorks, Kinnan activations, Thrasios activations, Kenrith, all those things get shut off by that. Torpor Orb turns off creature ETBs, which is going to shut off a Op Agent, it's going to shut off a Orcus Bowmaster and things that are coming in, so that's not going to really be great for decks that really need those ETBs. It's going to make it so that those spells aren't even really playable. Whether Runestone is similar to Grafdigger's Cage, some Yuriko decks do run Scroll Rack as a way of, again, manipulating their top deck by being able to refill their hand, maybe get some cards back on top that are just not great. And then also even a way of putting some big bombs back on top. Maybe you have them in your hand from previous Yuriko flips, or you've just drawn into them, and so this allows you to put them back. And some Yuriko decks are on Mox Amber. This is kind of iffy, especially as our land count is getting lower and lower and lower, because the MDFCs, if the front side is a creature or spell, you cannot pitch an MDFC to Mox Diamond because the back side is a land, but it doesn't matter. The front side is what the spell would check if you're trying to pitch it to Mox Diamond. And with that, that is making Mox Diamond great for acceleration, but it is also iffy because of the land count. It's also great though because you could turn 1 play it and now you have access to 2 mana on next turn. Not the worst card in the deck, and it is a good way of accelerating and getting our deck really going. Yuriko is typically pretty light on enchantments, but some decks will run Cover of Darkness because you choose a creature type, typically ninja, and then they have Fear now. And that means that they can't be blocked except by artifact creatures or black creatures, which would give you a way to then swing through and typically have stuff on block. So it's not a terrible enchantment for us. It just got reprinted actually in the Assassin's Creed set, so that's nice. Mystic Remora is in some Yuriko decks as a way of having access to cards being drawn and taxing your opponents, just the same way that Rhystic Study is, so that you are able to be answering and asking questions of the table. Bloodchief Ascension is run in some Yuriko decks and is a really great card. At the beginning of each end step, if an opponent lost 2 or more life this turn, you put a quest counter on it. So from your own end step, that's typically going to happen. And then whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, if Bloodchief Ascension has 3 or more quest counters, then you could have that player lose 2 life, and if you do, you gain 2 life. And life gain for us is kind of important because we are going to be targeted early and throughout the game, and this will gain us some life. And with our opponents casting spells and trying to find answers, those cards are hitting their graveyard and they're going to be losing life while they are trying to find answers, and we're going to be gaining life. And that's overall a very good thing for us. It's easy to get those 3 counters on Bloodchief Ascension, and then it's going to force our opponents to find removal for that and keep their eyes off of some of our other things like our creatures or our other artifacts, and that's going to really be key. It takes the removal off of other things and puts it on a Bloodchief. Yuriko is pretty light on lands nowadays. We're running about 22, and then when you count the MDFCs, that puts us up to around 28 or so. But there are some notable lands that we do run besides the MDFCs, which don't necessarily count as lands. We run Shizo Death Storehouse, which allows us to make a creature have fear. We run Otawara, which could be a land for us, or it can be a removal bounce spell to be able to get something off the field. And then Undercity Sewers enters the battlefield tapped, and then we surveil 1. So we could fetch on someone's end step, see what's there, knowing that we're going to draw it after we have drawn a card and we're getting ready to go into our combat phase in just a moment. We play the land for the turn, see what's there, and then at least we know whether or not we're ripping into a big bomb. That maybe determines what we do and who we attack. If you have other cards that we did not mention here, let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear what other things you run in your Yuriko decks and the reasons for them and how they've worked out. Another great resource is the official Yuriko cEDH Discord, which will be linked in the video here. They have many channels for deck discussions of the different types like tempo, combo, stacks, etc. And you can really get some ideas as you're theory crafting and also stay up to date on some of the current things that are happening in Yuriko decks. Don't forget to share any of your experiences with Yuriko in the comments below. We'd love to hear from other Yuriko players and learn how the deck has played in different metas.